Hey guys, welcome back to Coach All Writes. In this video, we're going to be talking about what exactly is on the AP Lang exam. First and foremost, a quick note about 2021. So last year in 2020, the exams were all abbreviated because of COVID-19. However, in 2021, the College Board has said that they are going to be offering the full test. So there are two options that you need to be aware of. One is a paper test, the other is a digital option. However, I'm not going to go into the specifics of those in this video. If you have questions about which option is best for you, then please talk to your AP Lang teacher or your AP coordinator. So let's start by talking about a composite score, because sometimes I think there's a little bit of confusion because the essay rubrics are now out of 6 points. I think sometimes students get confused between their essay rubric score and a composite score. So you don't actually find out your composite score until usually July. So that is going to be the score on a scale of 1 to 5 that you made on the exam. And that basically includes your multiple choice and your essays. So you don't actually get to find out how many multiple choice questions you answered correctly. You also don't get to find out what score you got on each of your essays either. You just get one number. It's a number between 1 and 5. And so oftentimes students want to aim for at least a 3 or higher in terms of their composite. And that's simply because for most colleges, that's the score that they're willing to accept. They're willing to accept a 3. Some schools, they start at a 4. In some cases, maybe some of the more prestigious schools, they require a 5. So if you have any idea of where you're looking to apply to for colleges, you might want to see what scores they require in order for you to actually earn college credit for taking your AP class and getting a certain score on the exam. Now let's talk about the exam format. So the first part of the test is going to be multiple choice. You have 1 hour to answer 45 questions, and this makes up 45% of your composite score. So we're going to talk about what the questions look like here in just a second. The second portion of your test is the free response questions, basically the essays. So you are given a 15-minute recommended reading period. You can actually start writing during this 15 minutes if you want to. You have approximately 40 minutes for each of your 3 essays. However, it's sort of like rolling time, so you technically have to pace yourself. They will kind of cue you in on how much time has passed, and they will recommend that you start your next essay, but technically speaking, you can manage your time as you need to. So the essays themselves are going to amount to 55% of your composite score. The College Board recently changed how they do the multiple choice section for AP Lang, and I personally am a fan of these changes. So they threw out some of the old question types for the reading questions. They no longer ask about footnotes. They also don't use terminology in the answer choices. So instead of saying something like anaphora as an answer choice, they'll write it out. They'll say like repeats the beginning of the sentence or something like that. That makes it a little bit easier so that students don't have to memorize all these different complicated terms. So you still have reading passages on the exam. The first 2 passages are going to be these reading passages where it's pretty much presented in chronological order. You might be asked about things like purpose or word choice or tone, kind of like you would see on the SAT or ACT reading section, but maybe a tad bit harder. The new type of questions are the writing questions. So these are questions where you're almost like an editor. You need to decide, should the writer add or delete a particular sentence? You could also be asked about transition words or just simply how to combine sentences effectively. So these are more similar to the writing and language questions on the SAT or the ACT English test, specifically the ones with a question stem. That means there's a question above it. It's not just random answer choices. So if you want to use the SAT or the ACT to practice, if you don't have access to AP Classroom, that could be a good way to do it. If you're looking for official AP questions to practice with and you don't have access to AP Classroom, then you could look at the most recent version of the AP Lang course description, because that has 1 passage of reading questions and 1 passage of writing questions at the end of that very large PDF document. So if you want to practice, that's a great way to do it as well. It'll give you an idea of the types of questions that are going to be asked. It's also important to recognize that even though approximately half of the multiple choice questions are reading questions, and the other approximate half is writing questions. It doesn't mean that you have to divide your hour into 30 minutes and 30 minutes. Some students might find that they need a bit more time on the reading, and they might be able to answer those writing questions a bit more quickly. Regardless, it's very important to make sure that you answer each question. Also, if you are taking the paper exam, I believe the College Board has said that you're not able to go back and answer questions that you've passed, whereas obviously on a paper test you could, so keep that in mind as well. Before we go over each of the 3 different essay types you'll encounter on the AP exam, we do need to go over some terminology. These terms are found in the 3 different rubrics, so each essay type has its own rubric. Each rubric has 6 total possible points. So the very first point that you can earn on each of the rubrics is for a defensible thesis. So defensible simply means that you could prove it or justify it, and a thesis is the overarching claim of your essay. Now, there is a wide range of what's technically considered defensible, so if you want additional tips on how to write a defensible thesis, I have additional videos that you can check out. The next 2 terms you need to know are evidence and commentary, because this accounts for 4 of the total 6 points on the rubric. So you need specific evidence. Regardless of the type of essay, you need specific evidence. So this could come from the sources in synthesis essays, the passage for rhetorical analysis. But for the third question, the argument question, the evidence really comes from your own knowledge. Regardless though, you need evidence that clearly proves your thesis. After that evidence, you need commentary. Commentary is when you explain the significance of your evidence. It's kind of like answering so what, or why is this important? When your evidence and commentary clearly help prove your thesis, you've created something called a line of reasoning. So a line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas. You want to make sure that your essay is coherent. You also want to focus on creating transitions between the different layers in your paragraphs and also between the paragraphs themselves. So we really want to make sure that you have a clear, coherent argument in your essay. The final point for each of the rubrics is the sophistication point. Basically, it means that you've achieved an elevated writing style that enhances the analysis or your argument. Now, I want to be very clear here. This point is very difficult to earn. A lot of times I see students get discouraged and they say like, oh, I'm never going to earn the sophistication point. That being said, if you can understand what contributes to sophisticated writing and you could work on trying to capture that in your essay, even if you don't actually earn the sophistication point, it can help improve your evidence and commentary. So for some students, the sophistication point might not be the goal. It might actually be better to focus on the evidence and commentary. Sophistication can be achieved in a few different ways, but there's one common misconception that I've heard from students, and that is sometimes kids think that if you just use elevated word choice, you can earn the sophistication point. It's not necessarily about your word choice. You have to be consistent throughout your whole essay. You can't just earn sophistication because of one sentence. So you really want to be thinking about the ideas and the commentary in your essay or your overall style, not just trying to sprinkle in some of these higher level words. Depending on the type of essay and your writing style, you could also earn the sophistication point by having a nuanced argument, perhaps by having a concession and refutation, or counterclaim and rebuttal. Now, just including this in, say, your thesis statement is not going to earn you the sophistication point. This needs to be more developed and more thoughtful. So really think about both sides of the argument and still prove your side, or think about the big picture implications. The first question that students will encounter is the synthesis essay. Now, technically speaking, on the paper exam at least, you do not have to write the essays in order of essay 1, essay 2, essay 3. However, from what I've heard from students, most students tend to like to answer the synthesis question first, simply because it is the most cumbersome. You are given 6 to 8 sources, at least one of which will be a visual text, and you have to construct your own argument that you can use the sources to support. So you're not summarizing the sources, you have your own argument, and you're using the sources as your evidence. It's kind of like a mini research paper, except they did the research for you. Now, you do need to clearly cite at least 3 different sources. So citing the same source twice counts as 2 citations, but not 2 sources. Another reason that most students tend to start with the synthesis essay first is because of the reading period. So you don't have to use the full 15 minutes to read the sources, though some students do. However, I found that a lot of students like to spend about 10 or so minutes reading the sources and planning their essay, and then they like to go ahead and get started and write that synthesis essay. If you're looking for any additional tips on any of the essay types on the exam, including synthesis, check out the different playlists that I have for each of the essays. Now let's talk about my favorite of the 3 essays, and that is the rhetorical analysis essay. So rhetorical analysis is when you are given a passage, perhaps it's a speech or a letter, maybe an article, or even an excerpt of a nonfiction book, and you have to examine how the writer makes rhetorical choices in order to convey his or her message, achieve his or her purpose, or develop his or her argument. So that's actually the language from the different prompts that you could encounter. So for this, first of all, we need to understand what a rhetorical choice is. It's what the writer is doing. We also want to examine the passage chronologically because it's not really supposed to be a scavenger hunt. We want to follow the author's line of reasoning and then kind of have that translate into our own essay as well. So let's really quickly talk about rhetorical choices. Now, I do have other videos that give a much more in-depth explanation, and I would love it if you would check those out. However, since you're here, why don't I give you a crash course? First of all, it's really important to recognize that choices create tone and appeals. I see a lot of times students are taught to identify logos, ethos, and pathos, and while those are very helpful, those are created by choices. So for instance, if you notice that a writer is being logical, ask yourself how you know. Is it because they're using conditional sentences like if then? Are they using statistics or facts or examples that are logical? Those are choices. So choices create appeals in the same way that choices can also create the tone. So if you identify a certain tone, maybe it's a very patriotic tone. Look at the word choice because the word choice will impact the tone as well. So here's a list of some of the, what I believe are more common choices. This is not an inclusive list, but these are the ones that I tend to teach and reinforce in my videos and in my classroom. Students will sometimes ask, what is the difference between a device and a choice? And to be honest, devices are typically phrased as a noun, like juxtaposition, but you can take that and turn it into a verb, which is a choice, and say juxtaposes or contrasts. So I've listed a lot of nouns here, but all of these nouns can be turned into verbs or verb phrases. If you guys want more information about that and how to talk about these things, shameless plug here, but go check out my brand new TikTok. Yes, I finally got a TikTok. I actually have a video series on there that talks about how to write about these different choices. If you want additional tips, or if you just prefer your tips in a minute or less, go check out Coach Hall Writes on TikTok. There have been times where I've given my students a passage and they've said, Coach Hall, I don't really know what the choice is here. And I've simply said, okay, but what is the writer doing? And they'll say something like, oh, well, the writer's flattering their audience. So those are also rhetorical choices too, because a choice is simply something that the writer is consciously doing. So they could be flattering their audience or criticizing something. They could be characterizing a certain person. These rhetorically accurate verbs can help you as you're thinking about choices as well. Something else that has tremendously helped my students is giving them what I call commentary verbs. So I've listed some of these verbs here at the bottom of the slide. Things like illustrates, highlights, suggests. Using these verbs can help you get to the commentary or the so what part of your essay. As an AP student, chances are you might have heard of the acronym SPACE-CAT. So this is an acronym to help you with rhetorical analysis, and the SPACE part of SPACE-CAT deals with the rhetorical situation. Now, what I've noticed with my own students sometimes is that they'll write SPACE-CAT in the margin of their paper, they'll fill it out, but then they don't actually use it for anything. We want to avoid that. There's a reason why we do the SPACE part of SPACE-CAT. You need to examine the speaker. So who is the writer or speaker? What are their credentials? What are their values or their beliefs or their needs, their desires, things like that, because that motivates what they're saying in the actual passage. Same for the audience. Who is the audience? And what's their relationship to the speaker? What values or needs or desires does the audience have, and do they share those things with the speaker? And then lastly, the context. We need to think about the big picture historically. So what relevant events were happening at this time, either locally, nationally, or internationally? There's also the exigence. So I like to think of this as the catalyst or maybe the impetus. What prompted the writer to write or the speaker to speak? So this could be as simple as they were invited to speak. It could be as simple as they're responding to a letter that they received, but there has to be a reason. Are they responding to a recent event? Why are they actually taking the time to speak or write in the first place? We also need to consider the purpose. This is hugely important. Why are they writing the letter, the article, the speech, whatever it is? What are they hoping to achieve? And we want to try to be as specific as possible here. We don't want to just say simply to inform or to persuade, because that's very limited. So be as specific as you can. And then lastly, we want to figure out their message or their argument. And when you're writing an essay, you don't want to just say to convey her message. Actually tell your reader what the message is. Be very clear about this because it shows that you understood the passage. The third essay question is the argument question. And so for this, students are given a quote to read. You don't have to actually rewrite the quote. That would just be wasting time. You don't even have to refer to the quote if you don't want to, though some students like to. The quote is simply to kind of give you a general idea of the topic at hand, because you have to assert a position on the topic. So it could be to assert a position on the value of the unknown, or to assert a position on one thing that's overrated and to explain why it's overrated. So you need to assert a position. You need to take a clear stance. It's also absolutely crucial to have specific evidence. So think about either current events, history, your outside knowledge, or even personal experience, but give concrete examples and not hypotheticals. One question I commonly receive from students is, how can I expand my knowledge base? A lot of times students feel uncomfortable with selecting evidence. They might feel like they don't have specific enough knowledge, or they just don't know what exactly to say. So one tip I have for this is to start listening to podcasts or TED Talks in your spare time. And if you can, it would really help to take notes about it so that you can refer back to it as you prepare for the exam. Start with a topic you are genuinely interested in. It doesn't matter if it's physics or sports. Start with something you actually care about and start learning more about that topic. So become an expert in a few different things, as opposed to trying to learn everything, because that's going to help you draw upon that specific knowledge a lot more readily. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to hit that like button. Also, make sure you are subscribed with your notifications turned on so that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos to help you prepare for the AP Lang exam. Also, as I said earlier, if you're on TikTok, go follow me at Coach Hall Writes. Until next time, happy writing!